and welcome to a brand new video! Today we have a new mysterious case. I have wanted to do it for a long time, but I kept postponing it to gather more information and be able to tell you more about this story. I find quite interesting the way in which everything got solved in the end, and I found it really incredible. As you saw today, I'm going to tell you about the Golden State Killer. Well, he had many names, which I'll eventually tell you about, but this is a story that I'm going to tell you today. But before we begin, don't forget to follow me on all my social media. You know I have a billion social media accounts. Also follow me on Twitch, where we stream constantly, we play, we talk, among many other things. Very well, now without anything else to say or comment, let's begin. The case of the Golden State Killer. Well, how does this story start to develop? Basically, many minor crimes began happening. Among those, things that had to do with robberies between the years of 1974 and 1975 in Central Valley, a city within the state of California, specifically in the Visalia area. These stats skyrocketed there. However, let's say that this wasn't attributed to one robber, but to many coordinated robbers for these acts. Nonetheless, December 11, 1975 comes, and the first more serious attacks happens in this place. A person, a man, tries to kidnap a girl. However, the dad, he didn't know the dad was very close to her. This man, called Claude Snelling, realized what was happening, go to the assailant, and started running and trying to prevent that from happening to his daughter. At the end, he managed to free his daughter. However, in the middle of this struggle, the assailant shot Claude and sadly, he killed him. He died on the scene, and at the same time, he kicked the girl's face really hard and then he escaped. And that's how the first acts of the man who would be later called the Golden State Killer began. From 1976 to 1979, there were a series of acts and crimes, especially a rise of women being raped. The first of those cases happened on June 18, 1976. This happened in the Sacramento area, another area of California, and one of the most prosperous ones in the USA. Let's say that he began developing a very specific modus operandi in which he started taking some souvenirs or things from the houses in which he committed those crimes. Just 6 months later, by the end of 1976, 9 rape cases which share the same modus operandi had been filed. Let's say that this man's activities began to be recognized and linked, especially because what he did was break into women's houses in the middle of the night when they were in bed. He broke in sneakily, and let's say that what he did was to stand in front of their beds and stared at them while they were sleeping. Also, he always had a lantern in his hand and wore black clothes and a ski mask. Besides that, the police discovered that he constantly, in the houses he broke into, left the windows open or the doors unlocked so he could escape easily. When he got to the scenes, he obviously intimidated the woman, especially by pointing a light to their faces. They obviously couldn't see who was talking to them, and he just started commanding the woman to do as he said. He practically said, "Don't scream, if you scream, I'll kill you," and he began forcing them to do everything, and at the end, that terrible act. In the end, the man took some souvenirs from the house, as I told you before, and he even took the time to make himself something to eat in the house. He took some kitchen tools, he prepared something, he ate, like making her understand that he hadn't left that place. And even when he was about to leave, he kept making her believe he was there so he could escape more quickly. After a few minutes, the woman obviously realized there wasn't anybody there and called the police. But there was nothing to do because the man escaped a long time ago. By 1977, there was a total of 28 persons who had filed denouncements for rape. But that's when this man started to change his modus operandi. Besides doing everything I told you about, Now he was following through with his threats of killing people and wasn't afraid of doing that anymore. He then started to branch out to more places in California, perpetrating attacks. But there were many doubts. Could it be the same person, or what if it's not the same person? But the way in which the attacks happened, they said it has to be the same person. And then a very important wave of attacks started happening. This time with a couple on February 2nd, 1978. They were Brian and Katie Mayori. They were walking their dog at night. It was a normal night for them. However, they started noticing a man was tailing them. They obviously tried to run away, but in that moment, the man, in his frenzy, started shooting at them and they both died. And that's when a wave of attacks, not only to women, but to couples, started to happen. What started to change in his modus operandi, besides everything he already did, he also broke into houses in which the partner was with a woman, and he didn't mind that. What he did on those occasions was to obviously threaten them both. He made the woman tie the husband as tight as she could. He showed her how she was supposed to do the knots, how she had to do everything so he couldn't move, and then he generally took him to a nearby room where he left him face down with several plates on top. He said that if he heard the plates break or fall, he would kill him. Then, obviously, he went back to the other room where the woman was, and the man could obviously hear everything that was happening. I can't imagine that moment for the man too, not only for the woman evidently, but also for the man. The impotence they must have felt, the fact that they knew that if they moved, he was going to kill him and he was going to kill her too. So I don't want to even imagine how those people felt before suffering the attacks. For many lived to tell the tale, but many didn't. Then 1979 arrived and the police finally realized that all those continuous and very alike attacks were linked. And let's say that they chose a specific name for the killer, which was the South Killer. And from 1979 on, there started to be many more victims. Among them, Alexandra Manning and Robert Offerman, Charlene Smith and Leeman Smith, which were also a couple. Maybe they tried to untie themselves or made a movement that made them lost their lives. Keith and Patrice Harrington, Manuela Whithen, Cherry Domingo, and Gregory Sanchez. And then the wave of terror ended until 1981. For some reason, between 1981 and 1986, the attacks completely stopped. And then in 1986, there was a new attack with the same modus operandi against Janelle Cruz, who was a woman of only 18. Obviously, within the investigations, there was the odd clue. There were prints, there was DNA that the perpetrator left behind, but I must say that many people don't know this, that before the year 2000, the DNA wasn't important in the investigations. There weren't many developed methods to deeply investigate DNA-related topics, so it wasn't a useful clue in that kind of sense. However, at some point, the police, after the rape of one of the victims, decided to collect some DNA and freeze it for many years to be able to eventually investigate further thanks to the technology. People from the police started to suspect that this person probably had some knowledge about police, military, Boy Scouts, camping, firefighters, or some of those disciplines because of the way he decided to act. He was very neat, he knew a lot about clues and the things the police may look for, so he was very careful not to sleep on that. He knew many things about knots. Specifically, when he was tying the man or the woman, he made sure the knots were done in certain way. And those were very advanced knots. I mean, at some point, they even called him the Diamond Knot Killer because all of the knots had that shape and they were very particular. Those were knots that I don't think none of us could do. And they discovered that he was a man that really liked inflicting terror and terrorizing the woman he was going to attack. Days before, he even made calls to the houses of the woman that he was going to attack. And those were messages that really, if I received that call, I leave the country. I mean, how scary. Basically, it was a voice that said many times, "I'm going to kill you," or "I know where you are, be ready." I'm going to show you here an example, the most famous one, so you can listen and get goosebumps. Among those famous calls, he made one in 1977 that said, "I'm the East Side rapist, you'll never catch me, and Merry Christmas." Others said, "What avenue? I'm going to kill you," which is the most important or the most popular, the one that people have heard and caused goosebumps. They also started to discover very specific things he did when he was attacking these women. He looked for neighborhoods, or well, I don't know how they called in other places where they could escape easily. They needed to have, I don't know, parks, sewers, hallways, or places through which he could move easily when escaping could find him. He also placed certain elements and warnings in the doors and in the windows, and besides leaving them open as I told you, he left that so he could hear if they moved so he could escape. He constantly wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, for that was something that could be investigated back then. There was an important clue related to one of the attacks, and it was that one of the women that was raped by this man said that while he was attacking her, the man started screaming, "I hate you, Bunny! I hate you, Bunny!" And so that began being a clue for the police to say like, well, this man is related or something in his past is related to Bunny. It's unknown if his last attack was in 2001 or in 1991. It's not clear yet, but what is known is that for more than 4 decades, there was an intensive search for this man until the case was catalogued as a cold one. It was very complicated to move forward from that point. The man had calculated everything and it was very hard to find him. And then the process of investigation of a journalist called Michelle McNamara began. She starts investigating the case and gets laser focused. When she heard about it sometime, she said, "Whoa, this case is fascinating. I love to contribute with something new and launch an investigation." Michelle started a very thorough investigation and wrote a book called "I'll Be Gone in the Dark." That's the name of the book because, sadly, that was one of the things he said before fleeing and leaving all the victims alone. So she started that investigation and wrote a very detailed book talking about all these women's terrible experiences. When you read it, you feel that the person is there and you feel the need to secure your door with 48 locks. That was work that helped a lot. She hoped that the DNA would help find him, and she also worked with the police. However, on April 21st, 2016, she was found dead in her house. The autopsy revealed she had a mix of drugs in her system. Among them, Adderall, Xanax, and fentanyl. This was an explosive combination for her body and took her life. This showed how little or how much that job of investigated consumed her. She wasn't able to finish the book, but however, her husband met with some officers to be able to finish it, and then was published, becoming a New York Times bestseller for more than 50 consecutive weeks. This was very important for the investigation, for the details she pointed at, and it started to open the possibility to make an investigation with that man's DNA. As I told you before, the police had kept some DNA from the crime scenes and had frozen it in case something developed in the future. As you know, the police now uses all the obvious technological advances and all the tools in its favor, so they managed to conduct a thorough investigation with that DNA. I don't know if you knew that. I've done it because I have a video in my channel in which I did one of these tests, but basically in the US, I don't know if it happens in other parts of the world, but I think only in the US, Some companies sell DNA tests. So there are these different companies that allow you to order a test via Amazon. They send you a box to your house and you basically put a sample of saliva inside a tube so they can make a deep investigation of your DNA. They tell you what your origins were, let's say that in most advanced cases, they tell you what diseases you may have, where do you come from, and a huge amount of information about you. Obviously, these tests have been done by millions of people around the world, and there's a huge database. What did the police do? They decided to take this DNA that they had kept for a long time and submit it to one of these companies to conduct some tests and see with whom or how many people could they link with that DNA as possible relatives of the perpetrator of these acts. Within the amount of people that had done that test, they managed to pinpoint around 20 people that had similar DNA to the person who committed these terrible crimes. So they started to investigate and decide who could have the closest DNA to him, and slowly the pool got smaller until they got a man called Joseph James DeAngelo. He is one of the persons that have the most probability of being him. So here was when a giant debate began. I think you're the ones that have to say something about this too. You have to tell me what you think. But basically, the police started a silent chase for this man. They sent many undercover agents to his house so they could get some DNA samples that could prove that he was the perpetrator. Here the debate is ethical, obviously, because many people say that wasn't legally correct, that the police couldn't do that, spite him and take DNA samples without him knowing. However, that's what they did. They got 2 DNA samples. The first one, I don't really know how they got it, but the second one they retrieved from a trash can. The police managed to get something with his DNA and then send it to the lab. In the lab, they obviously did the proper investigation and found that DeAngelo's DNA was 100% compatible with the one from the perpetrator of the acts. That's how they managed to catch the Golden State Killer. The name was given to him by the journalist who died investigating. And they found his identity after almost 4 decades of looking for him. And here's when I tell you that the way in which they discovered this man is really crazy, for the technological advances have led us to this. It's amazing that they kept the DNA and said, is this person? So now I'm going to tell you about this man who is Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. He was born on November 8, 1945 in New York. His parents were Joseph James DeAngelo Sr., who was a U.S. Army sergeant, and his mother was Kathleen Louise DeGroat. He also had 2 younger sisters and a younger brother. According to some relatives and people who knew him, it is said that he witnessed the rape of one of his sisters when he was very little. It was perpetrated by one of the aviators in a warehouse they were in West Germany. They also say that he was probably abused by his own father when he was just a little boy. They moved to California in 1960. There, he studies at the school normally in Rancho Cordova in California. They also say that in high school he was part of the baseball team, and by that time he started showing some attitude problems. He committed some thefts and he tortured and killed some animals. In 1964, he served in Vietnam War when he was 22 years old, and after the whole war, he managed to get into the university where he graduated from police science. That's when, around 1973, he started serving as a police officer in Visalia. And here's when everything gets tied together, friends, for indeed, he was a cop for most of his life, and that prevented him from being caught. As I told you before, the police started to suspect that the perpetrator probably had something to do with these disciplines because of the way the knots were made, among other things. And it was evident then he performed many of these attacks when he was a cop, and what he did to not get caught was obviously get involved in the case. They got called, so that he said, I want to see what happened or whatever. And then when he got to the crime scenes, he started to remove clues that could point as himself as the perpetrator. He moved things, he erased files, and he obviously manipulated all the information they could have had so they could never catch him. And that's where many of the techniques and things he used when committing those crimes came from. However, in 1979, he is fired from the Sacramento police for he found he had stolen a hammer and a dog repellent. Let's say that when they discovered him, he never denied the events and said, yes, it was me, that's it, it's to quit, to simply disappear, because imagine that he also thought like, if I remain here, if I plead innocent or whatever, they're going to start suspecting me and asking why I stole those specific things. So that was when he finished his work and committed many crimes. And that's when they also found the explanation to the part where I told you that one of the victims said that he started hitting her while committing the crime and also saying like, I hate you, Bunny, I hate you, Bunny. And that was one of the clues. They never found who Bunny was and couldn't link anybody to him, but after they found him guilty, let's say that they discovered that Bunny was a woman he went out with in 1970. It seems like she was one of his first loves and he wanted to marry her. However, to ask her to marry him, he wasn't normal nor nice, but he took a gun, threatened her, and told her she had to marry him. Obviously, she was shocked, but she managed to get out of that situation and left alive. Many people say that she doesn't live in the US anymore, but that she went to another country. She was like the person that triggered that psychosis in this man, and given that he felt for her or whatever, he started to commit these crimes. It was also discovered that many of the people who testified against him say that his intimate parts, so we don't get banned, his genitals were very small. So many people link that to his necessity to be satisfied, among other things. In 1980, he met other woman who would be his wife for the rest of his life, with whom he had children. She was a lawyer. Not many people have talked about the wife, and in my investigations, I didn't manage to find anything. The only known thing is that she divorced him officially in 2019, but no one has managed to talk to her and get to know what she thinks about this. After they caught him, the neighbors started talking and saying that they did notice some things in him sometimes, for he was obviously an old man then, he was caught when he was 70. They say that sometimes they saw him talking alone, fighting with him outside. He yelled and say like, I'm going to kill myself or I'm going to kill you. Or he talked about killing someone and they didn't know what it was. They only thought that he was an old man and he was senile. That scared them, but they didn't pay it much attention. And then when they caught him, that obviously started being a topic in the place. And they say like, yeah, maybe he had some odd attitudes. There are other people who never suspected him. And then the official arrest is done on April 24, 2018. Let's say that according to what the agents that caught him said, he was coming home after running some errands or doing something he had to do, and he obviously got surprised when he saw them. But calmly he say, I have to turn the oven off because I left pie in. And they told him like, chill, we turned the oven off, and they took him. But that time he was 72 years old, nobody suspected him, and that was a huge scandal inside the community. But they finally managed to show the face of this man, they proved all his atrocities, and let's say that they were told in detail, but the man didn't really say anything ever. Since they caught him, he kept silence, and the agents say that he listened with attention, like saying, let's see if you know everything I did, but with a very tranquil attitude. And it was only in the middle of the pandemic that his trial happened. His trial happened officially when he was 74 years old, with charges of 13 murders and 45 rapes. Actually, this is nothing compared to the amount of attacks he perpetrated. However, for the statute of limitation had expired, they couldn't charge him for many other attacks. This is something that I find terrible within the law. Obviously, for these victims, the first victims let's say that they couldn't get justice for their cases. He accepted all the charges, and he was also the only way in which he could avoid the death penalty. So he accepted all the charges, and also he said, I did all those things, I destroyed all their lives, so now I have to pay the price. He said it was his alter ego Jerry, the one who did those things, and he didn't have any way to stop him. He's basically declared guilty on June 19 of that year, getting a total of 11 life sentences. I mean, that man is going to die in a few years anyway, but he's going to be in jail for 11 more lives practically. It is said that Netflix is probably going to produce some series about this, and HBO is preparing some about this too. And there's also the success of some books written by the police agents and also Michelle, the woman who died investigating. They have all been a success. For me, this is an incredible story that after not catching someone for so long due to the technological advances, they could do it. Without that, he will still be free. But very well, I leave the Golden State Killer case here. It was a little long, but I find it very interesting. I want you to tell me what you think, what you feel about the police invading his privacy to get the DNA sample. I say that it's legit if they caught him. For me, that's fine. But if he hadn't been the culprit, I would have found that invasive and terrible. Anyway, friends, I leave this video here. You know that if you like it a lot, don't forget to leave a like, a thumbs up, comment what you think, what you feel. Don't forget to follow me on all my social media. You know I have a billion social media accounts. Follow me on Twitch, we will see each other over there too. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell so it lets you know when I upload a video. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching me. Don't forget to follow your dreams, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!